Good afternoon. My name is Shauna Stefanczyk, and today I wanted to be talking to you about developing state-aligned assessments. I was expecting a few people on the call, so we will just pause if that happens, but many people are busy and it's a Monday. So I'm just going to record this information and post it on my network. So my name is Shauna Stefanczyk. I am a former teacher, instructional coach, district coach, K through 5 principal, and consultant with the state department for PLC and ELA, and I am now my own independent educational consultant. And today I wanted to speak with you about creating curriculum and assessment, or specifically state-aligned assessments. So when doing this work with teachers, I always like to start with this question: which do you think comes first, instruction or assessment? And I have people stand on one side who think it's instruction and one side that stands for assessment coming first. And I love to hear discussions among people and why they think either of them come first. And that leads me to a little bit of a pre-assessment where people's minds are going. But concluding with, assessment is really important, especially in terms of the new priority standards that have been released. And since schools are graded on MAP and EOC achievement, we need to make sure that the assessments we are giving students align to the assessments they are taking at the state level between MAP and EOC. I feel like oftentimes we're surprised that students aren't scoring well, but it's not because teachers aren't good, and it's not because kids aren't smart, or that even kids don't know the content. It's because the way the questions are asked on the MAP and EOC assessment, students have not had the opportunity to experience. So as districts, one of the greatest things we can do is to ensure that our assessments align to what they will see on those state assessments, which is why I'm developing this course of creating state-aligned assessments. Because the schools that I work with, this is one of the things we do, because assessment should come first. In many cases, because it clarifies that target that we are trying to hit as teachers and that we want students to hit. We need to be crystal clear about that target. So these are the 5 steps that I'm going to propose to you today if you're interested in doing that with your staff. 1, we have to build collective efficacy around what high quality assessment components are. We need to review the priority standard pacing within our curriculum to ensure that we're covering those standards and that they are evenly paced. We need to anchor our assessment creators to the clarity and rigor of the standards. And we can do that by anchoring them into documents that have already been released by DESE. We can check the item and DOK type, so the question format that students will be exposed to on those assessments, and we can begin to leverage these curriculum documents into our PLC practices. So number 1, how do we build a collective efficacy or collective understanding of high quality assessments? This is a really important K-12 to engage in. What's the importance of assessment, which is why I start with that chicken or the egg, instruction or assessment. And then as a district, determining what are those components that we want high quality assessments to have. So typically to do this, I have everyone write on a Post-it or some type of thing, what do we think components of great assessments would have? So with some examples, people might say, well, every question on the assessment is labeled with a standard, or that every good assessment has a scoring guide, or maybe it has a variety of questions. So you give people an example of what they might write down, and then you give them just individual think time on what do we think these quality components would be. And you can use a Padlet, or you could do an old-fashioned anchor chart. Here's an example of a Padlet I have done with the district. After they came up with their responses, which they did not have high engagement on this particular Padlet, but then we grouped them and put categories. So they said it needs to mirror the MAP assessment in format. It has a variety of questions, appropriate length. Don't surprise them with something they haven't learned. And then I shared with them, here's some research on what good assessment should have. There are 5 criteria. It has content validity, it's reliable, it's fair, it has student engagement, and it has relevance. And you'll see what I did was I put those 5 headers here, and then I had them group their answers under each of those so that we could see and look. Student engagement motivation didn't have any, so we had to talk about what does that look like on an assessment. But we grouped our things after that, and I anchored them back into some ideas from this research. So it's appropriate length of time, contains fixed or flexible questions. We just talked about these things, and then we added to the list if needed. But it's great K through 12 if you can have some common components, because typically when you get to writing the assessments, not everyone has voice. So this is a process to build that voice and contribution at the beginning. So then after we reviewed those components, I shared with them these 5 categories and they sorted them. And then we talked about McTighe and Wiggins, whose work is still good today, of backward design. We need to have these clear assessments in place so that we have constant predictors of how our students might score on state assessments. Now we're going to talk about where do the priority standards fit in. We all know that we've got these new recommended priority standards from the state, and that state assessments this year will be shifting 80% to the standards, and in the next 2 to 3 years will be 100% over the priority standards, which is a good case for districts to be realigning all of their assessments because it's crystal clear what kids will be assessed on. So we need to know those standards. We need to understand where those standards are paced within each one of our units. Certainly there's going to be times that you're just covering them, but you have to make sure that you are assessing those priority standards throughout the year to give kids those opportunities. And teachers need to be clear, when am I teaching the priority standards and when am I assessing them? To help many districts I'm working with, I have created this template for districts who don't have much staff that they could just purchase that easily distinguishes the priority from supporting standards and shows them how to use their current curriculum resource, which is not your Missouri curriculum, right? Resources do not always align to the state of Missouri. So we have to show teachers where in their curriculum resource do the Missouri priority standards live. We need to have a document like this that is clear and concise and that they can embed all of their information into in a one-stop shop that delineates what am I prioritizing, but what do I still need to cover. And once they know where the priority standards live with each one of those units, now we can begin to create some unit or mini map assessments along the way. And to do that, whoever you decide your creators to be, I would definitely, with the stress of 2021, making sure they have release day. I know subs are of the essence, so they use district release time that is already scheduled, but we anchor assessment creators into state documents, the item specifications, the past released map assessments, the MoBlock LEAP assessments. If you haven't viewed those, we'll talk about them. And if you have them, this is a great time to utilize your proficiency scales. So just a reminder of item specifications, all these things can be found on the DEPC website, which usually aren't so easy to find, but they are there. That's a whole other webinar showing you where to find those things. And keeping in mind that your item specifications tell the sample stems that teachers can use to ask that standard. They do unwrap the standard for educators, and they give some item formats, the different ways that those they might be assessed. Multiple select is always very difficult for students, technology enhanced, and sometimes constructed response. So this is a great tool when making assessments. Then there's also the map EOC released items that you can find, and people can pull passages and map like questions to anchor themselves in and calibrate what do proficient rigorous questions look like. And now, if you're not familiar, the state did release these last year. There are MoBlock assessments for every core content now available 3 through 12. There's a different number for each grade level. It just depends on how much the work teams have gotten done. They are still working on K through 2 assessments, but this is a great map source where teachers can use these items to teach or to still steal formative assessment or to help them create their assessments. And last, if you have them, this is a great opportunity to use proficiency scales. So as I review these different documents that creators need to use, I took this as an opportunity, since ELA is such a difficult subjective subject for people, that I actually created a proficiency scale tool to help teachers make assessments. And so here's an example. If you're in the middle of making proficiency scales, or if you wanted a tool like this for your teachers to build, it is certainly available. But at the beginning, you have your ELA DESI glossary terms for what those ELA things stand for. At your level 3, what you do is all those documents I just talked about, I have hyperlinked into one spot. So you've got your item specifications, your map release item that you can double click on, and it tells you, look at these questions. If there is a MOLEAP assessment that they tie to, that will also be linked here. And then what's really helpful for teachers are these screenshots of common questions or unique question types that they could easily look at and replicate. This tool can also be used if your teachers are heavily using EdgeElastic or other item banks. The problem with that is those questions are not always aligned to the Missouri items. So you could use this tool to help your teachers vet. If you don't want to have them create questions, they can use this to vet questions to see, are they Missouri aligned? And the last thing, these scales are not only do they have a level 2 and you have scaffolded stems, which the state doesn't provide. You'd have to do some looking around to find the scaffolded questions for each skill, but also on these particular proficiency scales on the level 2, it gives you specific examples of the cognitive processes students need to support their understanding of that standard. So when students don't get it, drop to your level 2 and try doing these cognitive processes to help students get to proficient. So once your teachers have calibrated their understanding of the clarity and rigor of the standards by looking at those resources, and you get some great mini map-like assessments that they can backward design their units from, now you want to bring everybody back in on your PLC and get that voice. So my last recommendation is to incorporate these mini map-like state-aligned assessments into your PLC practices. And you can create specific protocols that help teachers. For instance, they could, before the unit, they could take the assessment, they could score the assessment together, and then they can talk about specific instructional strategies to use in order to teach kids, or in that case, they could also use the proficiency scale. How do we scaffold kids to get there? One point I left out that is great that I do in my own consulting as teachers make assessments, to give them feedback. If you have someone to do that, to vet and make sure that they are really solid. What we're trying to get away from, or what I consult, is the approach of get them off the hamster wheel. We're going to stop recreating curriculum and assessments. We're going to make them good up front, and then we're going to give you feedback. We're going to make them strong, and now we're going to use those within our PLCs to get to what really matters, which is the instruction of our students and how to coach you on how to do that well, and to give you tools so as a collaborative team, you can really have the deep instructional conversations that I think DeFore wanted all of us to have, but that data teams weren't getting us to. So we're shifting from data focused instructional meetings to instruction focused PLCs, leveraging strong curriculum and assessment documents. So that is quickly, in a nutshell, what I wanted to share with you today. I do have sample assessments as I work with my schools throughout Missouri that I also provide in addition to MOLEAP blocks. And here's an example of some exemplar assessments I have worked with districts to create, where I can easily show teachers some exemplars, because that's always nice to help in their mind too, and it gives them additional resources to pull from. There are the steps. Oh, and look, that's misspelled, so I'll just correct that while we're on here. Here are the steps in review. Build your collective efficacy around high quality components. Make sure you know how your priority standards are paced. Use those key documents, or you can buy them if you want to buy a tool, and provide some sample assessments if you can for teachers. Again, I already shared some products I can do to help you expedite that work, because I believe we need to expedite it for teachers and move on to coaching them in instruction. And you probably already know about my network if you're watching this video. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. Please feel free to reach out and message me if you have questions.